The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly was built to make visitors feel small. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Its walls were covered with the flags of 10,000 species, each one representing a civilization that had earned its place among the stars. And at its center, arranged in a circle that seemed to go on forever, sat the representatives of every spacefaring race in the galaxy. Ambassador stood at humanity's podium and watched the votes come in. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but she stood straight and kept her face calm. Around her, the holographic display showed numbers climbing higher and higher. Exile, exile, exile. The word appeared again and again as species after species cast their vote against Earth. Though with their long necks and golden scales voted first, they had always hated humanity. The beings of living crystal who communicated through pulses of light voted second. They feared what humans might become. The hollow minds, ancient machine intelligences who had watched galaxies rise and fall, voted third. They simply did not care. Had known this day was coming for years. Humanity had joined the Galactic Assembly only 80 years ago, a tiny moment of time for species that measured their histories in millions of years. And in that short time, humans had broken every unwritten rule that the elder races held dear. They had expanded too fast, claiming star systems that others considered theirs by right of being older. They had developed weapons that made the ancient powers nervous. They had found a primitive species on a distant world and helped them reach the stars, something the Assembly called a crime against natural development. And worst of all, they had refused to bow their heads and accept their place at the bottom of the galactic order. The elder races had expected gratitude. They had given humanity the stars, or so they believed. They had allowed these strange apes from a small blue world to join their great civilization. And what had humans done? They had acted as if they belonged. They had treated ancient empires as equals. They had dared to have opinions. The vote was not close. When the final number appeared, felt something cold settle in her stomach. 7,342 species had voted for exile. Only 891 had voted against. The rest had simply not cared enough to choose a side. High Arbiteran, whose scales had turned silver with age, rose from his seat at the center of the chamber. His voice echoed through the hall, translated instantly into every language known to the Assembly. The vote is complete. By the will of the Galactic Assembly, the species known as humanity is hereby sentenced to exile. All human worlds will be quarantined. No trade shall pass to or from their borders. No communication shall be received or sent. No human vessel shall travel beyond the boundaries of their own star systems. This sentence shall last for 1,000 standard years, after which humanity may petition for re-evaluation of their status. He paused and could see the satisfaction in his eyes. They had wanted this for decades. They had pushed for it in every council, every meeting, every quiet conversation in the halls of power. And now they had won. The condemned may speak if they wish, and added, gesturing towards podium. It was a tradition, a small mercy offered to those about to be cast out. Most species begged, some threatened, a few wept. Did none of these things. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of those who had voted against her people. Thus so proud of their ancient civilization, the who believed they had achieved perfection, the hollow minds who thought they had seen everything. All of them looked at humanity and saw something small, something young, something that needed to be put in its place. Smiled. It was a small expression, just a slight curve of her lips, but it made Anne's neck frills flatten against his scales. There was something in that smile that the High Arbiter did not like, something that made him feel as if he had missed an important detail. The people of Earth thanked the Assembly for its decision, said. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. We understand completely. We are young. We are different. We do not fit into the order you have built over millions of years, and so you have decided to lock us away until we learn to be more like you. She paused, and her smile grew wider. But I wonder if any of you have considered what happens when you cage a species like humanity. We did not reach the stars because we were patient. We did not survive our own history because we were content. We are here in this chamber because for 100,000 years we have looked at every obstacle in our path and found a way past it, through it, or around it. The chamber was silent now. Even the hollow minds had stopped their constant calculations to listen. You are giving us 1,000 years alone with our thoughts, continued. 1,000 years without your rules, your traditions, your expectations. 1,000 years to become whatever we choose to be, without anyone telling us it cannot be done. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small device. It was nothing special to look at, just a simple communicator, but when she pressed its single button, she knew that a message was being sent across the stars faster than light itself. The message contained only 4 words: Prometheus Protocol is now active. Thank you for the motivation, said. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, the assembly erupted in confused noise. Representatives shouted questions and demanded she return and explain herself, but did not stop. She walked out of the chamber, through the corridors of Nexus Prime, and onto the last human ship that would ever dock at the station. As the vessel pulled away from the great structure, stood at the observation window and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the light of distant suns, her people were already beginning their work. The assembly thought they had punished humanity. They thought they had caged a dangerous animal. They had no idea what they had just set free. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, and Nexus Prime vanished from view, remained at the window for a long time, still smiling. 1,000 years was a long time, but humanity had never needed 1,000 years to change the universe. They had done it again and again, in spans of mere decades. The assembly had given them 10 centuries of freedom from interference. It was going to be more than enough. For the first 10 years after the exile, the galaxy watched the quarantine zone with great interest. Monitoring stations were built along the border, their sensors pointed inward, waiting to catch any human ship that tried to escape. The hegemony volunteered to patrol the boundaries, their warships making slow circles around the cage they had helped build. But there was nothing to see. Human ships stopped appearing at trading stations. Human signals went silent on all frequencies. The border monitors detected no attempts to break through the containment field. It was as if humanity had simply accepted their punishment and gone quiet. The elder races nodded to themselves and felt satisfied. The young species had learned its lesson. They were sulking in their cage, licking their wounds, learning humility. In 1,000 years, when the exile ended, they would emerge as proper members of galactic civilization. They would know their place. High Arbiter and gave speeches about the wisdom of the Assembly's decision. The threat had been contained without a single shot fired. Humanity would be reformed through isolation, shaped by loneliness into something more acceptable. It was a kindness, really, better than destroying them entirely. 20 years passed, then 30, then 50. The Monitoring Council, a small group responsible for watching the quarantine zone, began to notice strange things. Their reports were mostly ignored at first, dismissed as technical errors or overactive imaginations. But the reports kept coming, and they kept getting stranger. The energy readings from human space were wrong, far too high for a civilization that was supposed to be in decline. The sensors detected power signatures that exceeded anything humans had built before the exile. Massive construction projects seemed to be, their scale visible even from the edge of the quarantine zone. More puzzling still were the population estimates. The Monitoring Council had expected human numbers to fall as depression and hopelessness took hold. Isolated species often declined, their birth rates dropping as their people lost the will to continue. But the readings showed the opposite. The population of human worlds was not shrinking. It was growing fast. and dismissed the concerns with a wave of his clawed hand. "They are contained," he said. "What does it matter what they do in their cage? Let them build whatever they wish. Let them breed like the animals they are. In 1,000 years, when they have learned their lesson, we will decide what to do with them." 70 years after the exile, a young analyst named Ara presented a report that should have changed everything. She had spent years studying the data, comparing energy signatures and mass displacement readings. Her conclusion was simple and terrifying. Humanity was not building a civilization. They were building something else, something that required more raw materials than any species had ever gathered, something that consumed power on a scale that should have been impossible. Her superiors thanked her for her work and buried the report in the archives. The assembly had more important things to worry about than the activities of a caged species. 90 years after the exile, the Monitoring Council finally convinced the assembly to take direct action. They would send a stealth probe through the containment barrier, something small and quiet that could observe Earth without being detected. It would answer the questions that had been building for decades. The probe was the most advanced piece of technology the assembly had ever built. It could hide itself from any sensor, travel without leaving a trace, and record everything it saw in perfect detail. It slipped through the barrier on a cold morning and began its long journey toward the blue world that had given birth to humanity. What it found made every species in the galaxy reconsider everything they thought they knew. Earth was empty, not destroyed. The planet was intact, its continents and oceans exactly where they had always been. The cities still stood, their buildings preserved and clean. The forests still grew, the animals still roamed. But there were no humans. The probe searched for days, scanning every corner of the planet. It found museums filled with artifacts, carefully labeled and protected. It found monuments to human history, great structures built to preserve the memory of what had been. It found gardens and parks, maintained by machines that continued their work even though no one remained to enjoy their efforts. 12 billion humans had lived on Earth when the exile began. Now there were none. The probe expanded its search. It visited every human colony, every space station, every mining outpost. All of them were the same, empty, preserved, abandoned. Humanity had vanished. The probe's final discovery came when it returned to Earth's moon. There, carved into the gray surface in letters that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, was a message. It was written in the trade language of the assembly, the words chosen carefully so that anyone who found them would understand. The message said, "Thank you for the motivation." When the probe's data reached Nexus Prime, the assembly descended into chaos. Where had humanity gone? How had they moved 12 billion people without anyone noticing? What did the message mean? N, who had grown old in the years since the exile vote, stared at the images on his screen and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion. It was fear. The cage was empty. The dangerous animals had escaped. And somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, humanity was doing something that the assembly could not see, could not control, and could not stop. For the first time, and wondered if the exile had been a mistake, not because it was too harsh, but because it had given humanity exactly what they needed: time, privacy, and a reason to leave everything they knew behind. The message on the moon burned in his memory. Thank you for the motivation. He had thought he was punishing humanity. Now he was beginning to suspect that he had done something far worse. He had challenged them. The data from the probe took 3 years to fully understand. Teams of scientists from 100 different species worked day and night, trying to solve the mystery of humanity's disappearance. They studied every reading, every image, every trace of energy left behind. And when they finally pieced together the answer, it shook the foundations of everything the assembly believed. Humanity had not fled to some hidden corner of the galaxy. They had not buried themselves beneath the surface of dead worlds. They had not uploaded their minds into machines and scattered across the void. They had left the galaxy entirely. The evidence was there in the energy signatures that had confused the Monitoring Council for decades. Humanity had built something that the Assembly's greatest scientists had declared impossible. They had constructed a stable doorway between galaxies, a bridge of folded space that connected the Milky Way to a spiral of stars 2 million light-years away. They called it the Andromeda Transit Gate. The elder races had theories about traveling between galaxies, of course. Every advanced civilization played with the mathematics, drew the diagrams, imagined the possibilities. But the energy requirements were too vast. The distances were too great. The problems were too complex. It could not be done. Everyone agreed on this. It was one of the few things that all species accepted as absolute truth. Humanity had done it anyway. The reconstruction of what happened took decades of work. Piece by piece, the scientists built a picture of humanity's great escape. It had started on the day of the Exile vote, perhaps even before. Humanity had known what was coming. They had prepared for it. The Prometheus Protocol, whatever it was, had set their plan in motion the moment Ambassador pressed that button in the assembly chamber. For 90 years, while the galaxy watched their borders and congratulated itself on containing the threat, humanity had been dismantling their civilization piece by piece. Every ship, every station, every habitat and factory and power plant. They had taken it all apart and moved it through the gate. The colonies went first. Small outposts on distant moons, their populations loaded onto great ships and sent through the doorway to whatever waited on the other side. Then the larger settlements, then the orbital stations around Earth itself. Finally, in the last years before the probe arrived, they had emptied Earth. 12 billion people, everything they owned, every piece of their history that could be moved, all of it carried 2 million light-years to a new home. And then, when the last human had stepped through, they had collapsed the gate behind them. The assembly tried to find another way. They searched for traces of the gate's technology, hoping to rebuild it. They sent probes to the edge of the galaxy, looking for any sign of the doorway that humanity had used. They found nothing. Whatever method humans had used to punch a hole between galaxies, they had taken it with them. There was no way to follow, no way to send a message, no way to know what humanity was building in that distant spiral of stars. The assembly debated for years about what this meant. Some argued that humanity had simply run away, choosing exile in another galaxy over punishment in this one. It was surrender, they claimed, proof that humans could not face the consequences of their actions. Others saw it differently. They understood what humanity had actually done. They had not accepted exile. They had rejected the galaxy that tried to exile them. The assembly had told humanity that they did not belong, that they were not welcome, that they needed to be locked away until they learned to behave properly. And humanity had responded by finding somewhere else to be. They had not been exiled from the galaxy. They had exiled the galaxy from them. The thought kept the elder races awake at night. Somewhere in Andromeda, humanity was building a new civilization. They had no rules but their own. No traditions but the ones they chose, no limits but those they placed upon themselves. And they had time, so much time. Light took 2 million years to travel between the galaxies, but the gate had been instant. Humanity could spend centuries developing, growing, changing, and the Milky Way would never know. By the time the assembly could even observe what humanity had become, they would already be something unrecognizable. The hegemony demanded action. They wanted the assembly to pour every resource into developing their own gate technology, to chase humanity across the void and bring them to justice. But the scientists shook their heads. They did not even understand how humans had done it once. Recreating the technology could take thousands of years, if it was possible at all. High Arbiter spent his final years staring at the stars and wondering what he had created. He had wanted to humble humanity, to teach them their place in the galactic order. Instead, he had given them the push they needed to escape that order entirely. On his deathbed, surrounded by younger who did not understand his regret, he spoke his last words. "We told them they could not belong with us, so they built a place where they could belong without us. And someday, when they return, we will learn what that choice has cost us." His successors did not understand. How could humanity return? They were 2 million light-years away, separated by a gulf of empty space that even light could barely cross. But he had spent his life studying young species. He knew something that the others had forgotten. Humanity had never traveled to Andromeda because they wanted to hide. They had traveled there because they wanted room to grow. And when they were finished growing, they would come back. 912 years after the vote that exiled humanity, a ship appeared at the edge of assembly space. The border monitors saw it first. They had been watching for centuries. Their sensors always pointed toward the emptiness where human space had once been. Generations of operators had grown old at their posts, waiting for something that most believed would never come. And then, on an ordinary morning, their screens lit up with an alert that made their hearts stop. Contact, unknown vessel, massive energy signature. The ship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The vessels of the assembly were elegant, shaped by millions of years of tradition. They flowed like living things, their curves and lines speaking of ancient beauty and refined design. This ship had none of that elegance. It was brutal, angular, built from materials that the sensors could not identify. Its hull was covered with structures that served no decorative purpose, each one clearly designed for function alone. And it was huge. The largest dreadnoughts of the hegemony could have fit inside its cargo bays with room to spare. It dwarfed space stations. It dwarfed moons. The ship broadcast a single message on all frequencies. The words were spoken in the old trade language of the assembly, but the voice was strange, both human and something more than human. The human continuity requests permission to address the Galactic Assembly. We have a proposal. The message spread across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds, carried by communication networks that had been built for exactly this kind of emergency. Within hours, every species knew that humanity had returned. Within days, the assembly had gathered on Nexus Prime, filling the Great Chamber for the first time in centuries. When the human delegation arrived, the gathered representatives could barely recognize them. They were still human in shape. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with 2 eyes and a mouth. But everything else had changed. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed wrong somehow, as if their bodies were merely suggestions rather than fixed forms. Their skin shifted colors in subtle ways, responding to light and temperature in patterns that no natural creature should display. Their eyes held depths that made even the hollow minds uncomfortable. 9 centuries of isolation had transformed humanity into something new. Their leader stepped forward. She was tall and slender, with hair that seemed to float around her head like a living thing. She introduced herself with a single word: covenant. "We thank the assembly for receiving us," she said. Her voice was calm, pleasant even. There was no anger in it, no hatred, no desire for revenge. "We understand that our return may cause concern. Allow me to explain why we have come." The chamber was silent. 10,000 species held their breath, waiting. "When we left this galaxy, we were a young species that had been told we did not belong. We were angry, yes. We were hurt. But more than anything, we were determined. You gave us a reason to become something greater than we were, and we took that gift and used it well." She gestured, and holographic images appeared in the air around her. They showed planets covered in cities of light, ships that moved between stars like fish swimming through water, structures that orbited suns, drinking their energy and turning it into power beyond imagination. In Andromeda, we found 17 intelligent species. They had never known the touch of galactic civilization. They had never been told that there were rules about how young species should behave, or which races were allowed to lead, or how progress should be measured. We met them as equals, and together we built something new. The images changed again, showing beings that no one in the assembly had ever seen. Creatures of crystal and fire, living shadows that danced between dimensions, vast collective minds that stretched across entire star systems, all of them working alongside humans, building a civilization that had no hierarchy, no elder races, no tradition of keeping younger species in their place. We call it the Andromeda Coalition, Covenant continued. And now we have returned because our exile officially ends in 88 years. We wish to give you a choice before that deadline arrives. High Arbiterin, a descendant of the who had led the original vote, rose from his seat. His scales had turned pale with age, but his voice was still strong. What choice do you offer? Covenant smiled. It was a gentle expression, almost kind. The coalition is expanding. We have developed stable transit gates that can connect the galaxies permanently. Over the coming centuries, we will be opening doorways between Andromeda and the Milky Way, and we are offering membership to any species that wishes to join us. She paused, letting her words sink in. Any species, including those currently under assembly jurisdiction. The chamber exploded into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other, their translators struggling to keep up with the flood of voices. Some demanded that humanity be arrested. Others called for immediate war. A few, mostly from younger species who had spent centuries under the thumb of the elder races, rose to their feet and cheered. And slammed his hand against his podium, calling for silence. When the noise finally died down, he fixed Covenant with a cold stare. You are offering to steal our citizens, to break apart the assembly that has maintained order for 3 million years. We are offering a door, Covenant replied calmly. Nothing more. Those who wish to stay may stay. Those who wish to leave may leave. We will force no one to choose. But for the first time in galactic history, there will be a choice to make. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of species after species. Many of you have spent thousands of years being told that there is only one way to be civilized, only one set of rules that matters, only one path that leads to the stars. We are here to tell you that there is another way, and if you want to find it, all you have to do is walk through our gates. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. The assembly had been built on the assumption that there was nowhere else to go. Humanity had just shattered that assumption into a million pieces. And the elder races, for the first time in their long history, realized that they were afraid. The hegemony demanded war. Their fleet was the largest in the galaxy, built over millions of years to enforce the will of the assembly. They had crushed rebellions, destroyed threats, and maintained order across 100,000 star systems. And now, their leaders stood before the assembly and called for the destruction of humanity before the infection could spread. They will break apart everything we have built, the admiral proclaimed. His golden scales flashed under the lights of the chamber. They will turn species against each other. They will spread chaos across the stars. We must strike now, while we have the advantage. Other elder races joined the call. The Assembly's military council drew up plans for an attack on the human vessel. Thousands of warships were gathered from across the galaxy, forming a fleet that should have been unstoppable. The attack lasted less than 4 minutes. When the first dreadnought fired its weapons, the human ship simply moved. One moment it was hanging in space, a massive target that could not possibly avoid the incoming fire. The next moment it was somewhere else, kilometers away, as if it had never been in the first place. The fleet tried to track it. They fired again and again, filling space with enough energy to crack planets. But the human vessel flowed through their attacks like water through a net, always somewhere else by the time the weapons arrived. And then it stopped running. The human ship did not fire back. It did not destroy the fleet that had tried to kill it. Instead, something passed through the attacking vessels like a wave of light. In its wake, every weapon went dead. Every engine fell silent. Every system that could cause harm simply stopped working. Thousands of warships hung motionless in space, their crews alive and unharmed but completely helpless. They could do nothing but watch as the human vessel moved slowly past them, heading toward Nexus Prime. Covenant's voice came through every speaker on the station. We did not return to conquer. We did not return for revenge. We returned because we remember what it felt like to be small and afraid and told we did not belong. We returned because there are species in this galaxy who feel that way right now, under the control of powers that see them as lesser. We are offering a door, nothing more. Over the following century, the Assembly watched helplessly as their civilization began to change. The first to leave were the oppressed, species who had spent thousands of years as servants of the elder races, told that they were too young to have a voice, too primitive to be treated as equals. They walked through humanity's gates and did not look back. Then came the curious, young civilizations who wanted to see what lay beyond the boundaries they had always known, scientists who dreamed of knowledge that the Assembly had forbidden, artists who wanted to create without ancient traditions telling them what beauty should be. And finally came the dissatisfied, species who had been members of the Assembly for millions of years but had never quite fit in. Those who had questions that the elder races did not want answered. Those who had ideas that the old order could not accept. The gates, humanity built them at the edge of every major star system, free doorways that anyone could use. The coalition asked for nothing in return. They simply offered the choice and let each species decide for themselves. Not everyone left. Many preferred the order they knew, the traditions that had shaped their cultures for longer than humanity had existed. The Assembly remained, weakened but still standing. The elder races still controlled vast stretches of the galaxy. But the old certainty was gone. The assumption that there was only one way to be civilized, only one path to the stars, only one set of rules that mattered. That assumption had been shattered and it could never be rebuilt. 100 years after humanity's return, High Arbiter and requested a meeting with the human delegation. He was ancient now, his scales faded and his movements slow. Most of those who had been present at the original Exile vote were long dead, but had lived just long enough to see the consequences of that decision. He met with a human diplomat named Grace in a small room overlooking the stars. She looked young, but her eyes held the depth of someone who had seen centuries pass. "I have a question," and said. His voice was tired, carrying the weight of more regret than he could ever express. "One that has haunted me since you returned." Grace nodded, waiting. "You had the power to destroy us. When your ship stopped our fleet, when you showed us how helpless we truly were, you could have ended the Assembly forever. You could have burned our world, scattered our people, erased us from history the way we tried to erase you." He paused, struggling with words that tasted like ash in his mouth. "Why did you not take revenge?" Grace was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Because you gave us the greatest gift anyone has ever given humanity. You told us we did not belong, so we built our own place to belong. You told us we were not good enough for your civilization, so we built a better one. Every great human achievement has come from someone telling us we could not do something. You told an entire species that we were not welcome in the stars." She turned to face him and saw something in her eyes that he did not expect. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was gratitude. "You have no idea what you created," she said. "When you exiled us, you freed us from everything that was holding us back. Your rules, your expectations, your ancient ideas about how civilizations should behave. We went to Andromeda with nothing but ourselves, and we built something beautiful because there was no one there to tell us we could not." She smiled, and it was the same smile that Ambassador had given the Assembly 900 years ago. "We did not come back for revenge because we are not angry. We came back to share what we found. We came back to show everyone else that they have a choice too, that there is more than one way to reach for the stars." And sat in silence, processing her words. All those years of planning, of scheming, of convincing the Assembly that humanity needed to be contained. All those years of believing that he was protecting galactic civilization from a dangerous threat. And in the end, he had done nothing but push humanity toward greatness. "We were fools," he said finally. Grace shook her head. "You were afraid. Young species are always frightening to those who have grown comfortable with their power. We understand that now. We do not hold it against you." She stood preparing to leave, but paused at the door. "The gates will stay open forever. If any of your people ever want to see what we have built, they will be welcome. That is our final answer to the exile vote. Not destruction, not revenge. Just an open door and the knowledge that there is always somewhere else to go." She left him alone with his thoughts and the endless stars. Outside, across the galaxy, another convoy of ships was passing through humanity's gates. More species choosing to leave. More beings deciding that they wanted something different than what the Assembly offered. The old order was not dying. It was simply becoming one option among many. And somewhere in Andromeda, humanity continued to build, continued to grow, continued to prove that the greatest response to those who say you do not belong is to create a place where everyone belongs. The galaxy had voted to exile Earth. Humanity had used that exile to become something greater than anyone had imagined. And now they had returned, not as conquerors, but as builders of doors. It was, in the end, the most human thing they could have done.